Hi, it's Matthew Holt. It is THCB Gang. Very special episode this week because it's just me and Jen Goldsack, who's the CEO of the Digital Medicine Society. Getting it wrong, Digital Medicine Society. One day, Jen, I'll get your company's name right. And we're going to dive in a bit to Jen's been on THCB Gang a number of times now. Talked a little bit about digital medicine, but mostly just been ranting and raving about all the things going on in American healthcare. But we are two expat Brits. And it's probably time we talked about American healthcare, but more importantly, what does digital medicine society do? And we're going to dive all into that in a second. So I'm looking forward to this. So Jen, welcome to THCB Gang solo. Just you and me to entertain the troops. So let's start a bit with the beginning with you, because when I met you, you were this mythical figure because you were a rower for the English national team, and then you had a fight with the English national team and became a rower for the American national team. So first off, you have to explain your athletic career and your bi-national situation.
My finance, yes.
And what were you doing in England, and how did you get to America, and how did you open digital health? But start with the rowing.
Okay, well, we'll start with the rowing. Well, funnily enough, I didn't start rowing till what we would describe over in the US as my third year in college. I was a rugby player for the first couple of years until I spectacularly blew out my knee. So a lot of people have seen me walking around conferences over recent years doing the long tail of repairs and getting to experience the healthcare system in all of its glory. So there's been that. Ended up, was very lucky. I played sort of for England students as a rugby player and these sorts of things. So was a good athlete and needed to do something else that was sort of scratch the itch for competition for me and something else that was hard. And I was at a university where rowing was another big sport. And as it turns out, you could sit down to do that one, and the rest was history pretty quickly. So rowed for college, quickly made the national team, was very lucky, had some great coaches. And you're exactly right, I was on the British team for a few years. But my mum's actually American. So my father's British, my mum's American. They were a holiday romance. And was able to take advantage of my other passport. So I was actually on the US team for World Championships in 2007 and then the Beijing Olympics in 2008.
So the British team, the coach pissed you off and you said, screw you, I'm going to go join the Americans, and that was all okay? Doesn't the NCAA, can you transfer like that?
They have to release you. So we did actually have to request that they release me. It's easier for World Championships. It's harder for the Olympic Games. But they did release me. So that probably tells you something as well. It was a really challenging situation. I'd had some injury issues. I had a bike accident and blew my shoulder out. So was top British athlete in 2005, 2006. I missed a chunk of the year because I had shoulder reconstruction, came back. Was top athlete again, but hadn't been ever in the centralized system. The story I tell myself, I'm sure someone else has stories about it, is that, that wasn't a good look for the top athlete to be continuing to come from the club system instead of the centralized system. That led to some selection challenges in 2007. So I decided at that point that, you don't get that many shots where you're in shape enough and you're going fast enough, and there's a berth at the Olympic Games on the line, and I wasn't going to take any risks. And the thing about America is if you win, they're going to select you. So I came over in 2007, I won trials, went off to World Championships, got a silver medal, and then went on to the Games next year. So certainly still have very, very good friends from the British team. It's been a tremendous squad for some folks. It didn't work so well for me, and I ended up staying here, and
you didn't have to go buy a Bermudan passport or a Netherlands passport or whatever to get in.
Exactly. Well, and this is always the thing when I'm traveling now, which is I have the two passports. And what's interesting is I leave plenty of places and never seem to arrive because depending on which customs line.
You and me the same, right?
Although they're about to retire the red one, which makes me sad for a number of reasons. We're going to go back to them all being blue. So there's that.
Well, there is that. And it's going back to being blue. And we won't discuss Brexit too much on this, but oh my God. No. The main advantage of having a British passport went away, but there we go.
The main advantage is you stand in immigration across Europe.
Never mind. Right. Well, so clearly at that part, you're a pretty big healthcare user. because between the knee surgery and the shoulder surgery and all this other stuff you're doing, I know you're still doing that. But give me a sense about. So you have a scientific background. So how did that wind up in you getting to being involved in digital medicine, digital health?
Well, yes, I'm a chemist by training, so we're looking at each other through liquid crystals. That was my research. So, an LCD.
Your Zoom is your fault. Well done.
Exactly. So, obviously did undergraduate, grad school while I was training, and then did nothing sensible and was just rowing for a few years, and always thought to myself that I worked really hard. I'd been to good universities, I had a variety of different degrees, I'd gone to the Olympics, I was going to be one of the most employable humans on the face of the earth. But if anyone remembers what the economy was like in the late summer, early fall of 2008, it wasn't a great place to be looking for a job. So I decided that I wanted to stay in the States, which Matthew, frankly, was a bit of a surprise, but do actually love being here. Decided to stay, was living in Philly, and, honestly, was just trying to think about where I could actually get a job. I had a scientific background, and so I ended up working at the hospital at Penn and applying my research skills in the healthcare environment. They were still sort of hiring. And then that was really, I think, integral to my career to date, because first of all, I had an absolutely phenomenal boss who was a wonderful mentor. But if you think about what was happening in healthcare, then we had the Reinvestment and Recovery Act, which poured a ton of money into very interesting kinds of healthcare research. We established things like implementation science. 2009, the High-Tech Act was implemented. So that was really the sort of leading edge of the digitization of healthcare. And absolutely by happenstance, given my background, I was there, I was in the thick of it. I was with an absolutely tremendous research team at Penn. And, that really started my interest and commitment to, if we're going to digitize healthcare, let's do it right. And I also, perhaps on a more personal note, a lot of people transition or struggle with the transition from being a really competitive athlete into their next career. You have some kind of identity crisis or whatever that looks like, and being able to work in healthcare and to think about waking up every day in the way I used to be the best in the world at, going backwards very quickly in a boat. So you can talk about the value of that if you like, but, being able to then wake up and come to work and really think about trying to change a system that is responsible for caring to people, where we know that there are these challenges around access, and where we know that there's what I consider to be a bit of a once in a lifetime opportunity to fundamentally change things as we go through this digital evolution, really allowed me to sort of sink my teeth into the next thing and manage that transition sort of personally really easily compared to a lot of people.
No, that's great. And I think, that's true. You obviously see that a lot with different levels of athletes who come through it and go past it. And, a lot of them get depressed and think, well, they don't know what they're doing. And the other thing is, you think about it, is that most people spend their life dithering about trying to figure out many people, looking at myself in the mirror, right, spend many years of their life, wandering around colleges, universities, early jobs, whatever. Takes them years and sometimes decades. In my case, I'm not sure I've got there yet, figuring out what they're doing, right? Whereas some professions, I put doctors in this group, but clearly people who are serious athletes, really serious athletes, they're really dialed in really early. And, you start, whatever it's you're doing, but especially if you're, a soccer player, an athlete, or, track and field athlete, whatever it is, a cyclist, you're usually really doing a ton of that to the exclusion of other stuff. And it's a bit of, people come out of college or whatever, they're at the end of that period, and they're like, oh, what the hell am I doing now? And, it's been so much of their life. And obviously, the longer you do it, the more the void is, which is, by the way, why you see all these, pro football players and soccer players, completely collapsing and dying early, because, after they left, they don't know what the hell, they don't have a next step, even if they've been super successful. The death rates of those people is incredibly early for people. The alcoholism rates and all that stuff is off the charts for all of them, and it's not a surprise. So well done, Dime, for and the other work you've been doing, and Barack Obama for rescuing your mental health. Now let's go forward, right? So there you're at Penn, you're doing research. I know you're involved in clinical trials initiatives and a bunch of other stuff. There was, believe it or not, before Dime started, so it's 2018, 17, 18, I think. When did Dime start?
19.
19, okay. Believe it or not, before there was Dime, before there was a health conference, there were people doing stuff in what was called digital health, and in fact, believe it or not, there were people doing that a long time ago, right? And I think that, so if you drag back to my ill-begotten youth, when I was like wandering around the Institute for the Future in the late 90s, there were conferences, there were people, there was an e-health boom. It was mostly brochure websites, but a lot of people had lots of ideas about stuff we were gonna do. Not much happened on the, and I was asked yesterday, what's the difference between health IT and health tech or digital health? And it's kind of like, what was the stuff we were trying to do inside the hospital to put in Epic and Cerner versus what is the stuff that consumers and others were using that was more, it was more sort of future looking, cloud based, mobile based, all that kind of good stuff. But what I'm getting at is that probably a lot of that development happened around and about. A lot of it was patient driven. A lot of it was technology driven. It didn't kind of really come from the sort of typical medicine, big center sciencey place. And you saw over, as on the one hand, all those organizations, big organizations, were getting money from the government, from ONC and others, to both, the money that actually correctly came from CMS, but was directed by ONC to put in the EMRs. But a bunch of other money, not as much, but real money was put in to do standards developments and build Smart on Fire and all that kind of stuff. And, that went to Boston Children's and a bunch of other places. So there was development of standards and what have you in the kind of teens, the early teens, 2011 through, the Obama administration. We started getting people looking at this from a sort of more clinically scientific viewpoint. And obviously you also at that time had people starting to be critical about the EMR implementations that we were, the money was being thrown hard behind for that kind of quote unquote shovel ready project. It didn't stop Epic becoming this dominant force it's become in healthcare. But I guess the question is, when Dime was announced and some of the other work, it seems to me that was kind of, can we put a more, as you said, a more sort of rational, quasi-academic, academic's the wrong term, sort of quasi-structural lens around this and make sure that what we're doing is the right stuff. Have I interpreted it correctly? And can you tell me a bit about how it originated?
Yeah, that's exactly right. And I think you are exactly right to highlight what had been happening at the very least, the decade before, again, going back to the HITECH Act in 2009. But as you said, people played around with Palm Pilots and stuff like that previously. There had been sufficient exposure. What it comes down to, what the digitization of healthcare comes down to, for me, at its most simplest, is the fact that data no longer lives in a manila folder locked in a medical practice or in a file cabinet that is locked and only the PI per the old school IRB applications has the key. The groundswell, I think, of what we believed was possible was being driven by 10 years worth of data that was being collected in EHRs around the country. And that started, I think, to allow us to imagine what might be possible in new ways, coupled with the miniaturization of a lot of these tools and technologies that allow us not only to transfer data that is collected within the walls of the clinic, but that we can actually connect and capture data with patients and healthy individuals outside of the clinic. That was, I think, the impetus for us coming together at Dime to say, we're at a juncture whereby there are sufficient new tools in the toolbox in the digital era that we need to be intentional around how we use these to solve some of the most pressing and persistent challenges in healthcare, whether that's access, whether that's, affordability, both for individuals and society, equity, the fact that there are plenty of conditions where we actually can't help you at all because we don't have disease modifying agents or therapies that actually work for you, or that you might have a diagnosis and we simply aren't good at matching, decision support, what you are struggling with in your health with the optimum and culturally appropriate intervention for what you are struggling with. We saw technology, the ability to leverage 10 years of EHR data, new sort of explosions in compute to allow us to actually evaluate these data pretty cheaply and to generate data outside of the clinic as being the tipping point to a fundamentally different way of caring for people and actually delivering on that learning healthcare system that what we've been talking about for 10, 15 years now.
So you came, the early days, you came up with this series of definitions, right? Your digital medicine, digital health, digital therapeutics folks alliance were in there. I know Megan Cato now works for you, not for not for them anymore, but Coda, sorry, Cato. I've got Cato on the brain.
You're exactly
Thank
right.
you.
Yeah,
I met her in Rome. I have another friend called Cato I met in Rome, and early stage Alzheimer's.
I got a selfie of you two in Rome.
Yeah, well, I was just showing you that she was, barely paying attention, and she was paying attention to the lecture. So that
she was. You were the one taking the selfie and not paying attention.
That is true. I may have been trying to distract her attention. I was just checking in with her, making sure she checked in with her boss. Anyway, there was that definitional piece. How did the actual organization come about? I mean, so who's sitting around saying, well, we need this organization to we'll discuss more about what you do, but what was the actual origins of that?
So do you know who I attribute all of this to? A chap called Peter Bergathon. So he's retired now. He eventually retired from Biogen, I think probably 2, maybe 3 years ago. But I heard him speak on a panel and he started to say, gosh, well, it's probably time that we actually have a professional society for digital medicine. And I remember thinking at the time, gosh, well, that's a really terrible idea. First of all, the last thing the world needs is another professional society, because in my mind, all people do at these things is sit around in sort of leather wing chairs and, drink scotch. That
sounds like a good idea. I want to join that society.
I want to join one of those. And also, my thoughts at the time, because I'd been working closely with digital sort of solutions in healthcare, to your point, it wasn't new in 2019 for a long time. My question was, well, gosh, surely someone's already done this. So me being, depending on the adjectives you want to pick, tenacious or a pain in the ass, decided that I would figure out who these people were who were already running this professional society, and I would get involved and I would go and help them. As it turned out, there wasn't one. There wasn't a sort of professional home for individuals from all of the different backgrounds who we believe very strongly need to be at the table for the successful, and I underscore successful, digitization of healthcare. There are certainly digital initiatives that sit within traditional siloed professional societies, but there wasn't somewhere where patients and citizen scientists were sitting, conversing, doing knowledge exchange with cybersecurity experts, with IT infrastructure folks, with product folks, data scientists, clinical scientists, clinical care providers, healthcare executives, payers, regulators, investors, funders, all of these people who need to actually decide what is it that we want to do as healthcare goes through sort of the fourth revolution, the digitization of healthcare. What is it like? What does good look like? So many questions that I hear in so many of these sort of siloed environments are agonizing over issues that have been solved by other professions. Security has been commoditized in almost every other industry, and yet we agonize over it. We don't hire appropriately. We don't have those skill sets. So why don't we actually just figure out how to collaborate with those folks? People question the performance of things like sensors and chips. Well, there's a whole field, it's called electrical engineering, and it's been going on for decades. None of this is actually hard, right? And so this is what we wanted to create because it didn't exist anywhere else. This is what we wanted to bring together and really support the field broadly to drive the digitization of health without software being a sort of a bolt-on and an afterthought from, different sort of clinical leaders, nor for, I'm going to oversimplify, forgive me, sort of Silicon Valley being the tail that wags the dog. Let's actually build this together. Let's figure out what the problems are that we're going to solve for. Let's figure out what the specs are of success. And then let's mine the expertise that actually exists across a cross-functional sort of group to get it done as quickly and effectively as possible.
So, I mean, I think you're right. If you go back to, those days, there's the Silicon Valley crowd. And obviously I was sort of more part of that with Health 2.0 and there's, you'd add in Rock Health and kind of Startup Health and those kind of groups who are around the startups in there. There were individual people doing innovation work at sort of big medical centers, but most of them were kind of trying to get into the Silicon Valley crowd. And in fact, half of them are all now left and gone to work for General Catalyst. If you look at like the folks from Jefferson and elsewhere, right, or Intermountain, you know, they've all said, oh, that was a good idea. We like the money those guys are making. We'll quit this healthcare stuff and go and do that, you know. And then there was stuff going on within the big healthcare IT organizations, you know, Chime and HIMSS, but they had really kind of become trade shows, and they were very siloed in the hospital systems and weren't, you know, and I think it's fair to say that there isn't. I mean, we'd kind of been, actually, Healthcare Indu and I had kind of been asked, oh, what are you going to do to build this? And I kept on saying, I like running this conference, and everything else is a pain in the ass. I ended up becoming a government. Kind of amusing. I was with, as I mentioned earlier, I teach a class at USF. At University of San Francisco in digital health entrepreneurship. I actually had Rebecca Mitchell, you may know, who was at Longo for a while as my guest lecturer last night. And I completely forgot, but I remembered that she'd been actually my customer because we ended up doing a whole bunch of work for ONC too. So there's big gobs of money that went to Boston Children's and elsewhere. A sliver ended up at Health 2.0. And we ran challenges, and we had an innovation database and some other stuff that we did. And Rebecca was my, as is typical, Rebecca showed up under Fazed Mostashari at ONC, and they decided that whatever the original contract that we were building away on was completely wrong, and they wanted us to run a bunch of roundtables, kind of, which could have become, you know, a dime type thing about, because it did involve patients and citizens and what have you. I remember hanging out with Anne Wojcicki of 23andMe outside the White House going, you know, as we were leaving, going, isn't anybody looking after you? You're the wife of this multi-billionaire, you know? And you're just wandering down the street. Who knew? Anyway, but there was also, you know, there was also a series of other people who could have kind of got this going. And nobody really did. But I do recall going to kind of the messy version of this. You mentioned the learning healthcare system. There was a National Academy of Medicine meeting about the learning healthcare system 2015-16 that I went to. I remember it was like the messiest, worst run meeting ever. There was like presentation after presentation by all these unbelievably genius people, like, you know, and Amy Abernathy and John Alamka and, you know, 80 people like that. Sorry?
They are very smart, and they are very good at what they do.
Absolutely. There was no downtime at all. There was no lunch break. There was a 5-minute coffee break in the morning, afternoon. So you never got to talk to any of these people because everyone was in the audience. I mean, a little bit. And everyone had PowerPoints and was like burning through them as quickly as they could. And I was the very last presenter, and I just showed Twitter screens. I didn't do it. And I was like ragging on them all for being so out of touch with how learning actually worked, you know. And they came out with a report on the learning healthcare system and the rest of it. But that's where, you know, that was the sort of government academic approach to this, right? Can we put together why is the learning healthcare system? Because of all the data you talked about, right? That's why we now could do it. And that didn't. So I think, you know, the fact that you sprung Diamond to life was great. So how did you actually do it now? So you've gone around and said there's nothing out this. What was the actual impetus for you? You know, what did you do next? You sent out a tweet, said, please join me.
Willpower.
Sorry?
So this is it. So we had a tremendous sort of cohort, and you can look at our Founders Members Council, and I will remain eternally grateful to all of them for believing that we could put something together that would really meet these needs, and put together, you know, setting up a 501c3 is not hard at all. So, you know, really got that going and decided, what do we want to use? What do we want to point to as an example of the kind of work that we want to lead? And so one of our early areas of focus, and again, very intentionally, because, you know, when I mentioned what was coalescing in 2019, why was this the right time, is it wasn't just the data that we could capture inside the walls of the clinic that was becoming liquid. It was the fact that we could also capture data outside of the clinic. So we went together and with a tremendous group of multidisciplinary scientists, built our V3 framework, which is an evaluation framework that has now been adopted by the European medicines agencies. It's become sort of a de facto gold standard in industry for evaluating digital sort of measurement products, so sensor generated measures. And we said, this is the kind of work we want to do. It's a how-to guide. It's published in Nature Digital Medicine. It's robust, but it also comes with a toolkit. It's applied. We want case studies. We're going to educate you on it. And what's next, and what's next. And that's really how we started the work. We realized that there was a gap We realized that it would require cross-disciplinary collaboration to get it done. How you evaluate a sensor is a very different group of folks to the algorithms, which is a very different group of folks who are sort of considering the clinical utility of that information. How do we create a full stack framework for how we actually collaborate, build solutions, and then implement them in a way that's high value? So we went in with a case example, show, don't tell.
Right. So you've done that, right? You've got this really high-powered board that you've crammed together by force of will and torture, or however you did it. And let's wind the clock forward, right? You've got a gazillion people on the team now. I mean, how do they work at Dime?
I know, it's unbelievable. Hands down, the best team I've ever worked with. I'm constantly shocked. It's 40. We've got 45.
I mean, that's like real amounts. You're like somebody somewhere is doing a real job. There's actually HR and operations and stuff, right?
Yeah.
You know, that's real. That's a real organization to run in and of itself, right?
It is.
Obviously, you've got alliances with other organizations and work across, and we'll talk about that. You know, some of those in a second. But I mean, so now you actually are a real force to be reckoned, not just personally, not just your force of will, but the whole organization obviously is a force to be reckoned with, and is doing a lot of different things. So you've got this show, don't tell, actual practical projects that people use. Can you explain theoretically, and we'll dive into some of them in a second, but explain theoretically, how does whatever, and I know you have academy projects and other stuff, so we'll talk about the panoply of all the stuff you do, but theoretically, what is the goal that you have people working on teams, organizing projects, you have a vast sort of community of companies and academics and others getting involved sort of around and about in these committees. How does stuff get translated from we're all going to get together to it actually appears and changes the way that, you know, as you want to say, care is delivered? What's that flow that you ideally would think should be happening or is happening?
Yeah, I think the most important thing that I'm incredibly proud of our team is showing up with sort of some humility and low ego every day, which is this is a group of experts on staff. There's no doubt about that. But the reality is that given the sort of organization that we aren't building solutions, we aren't building products, and we aren't delivering care or doing clinical research.
Right.
The only way that we are successful is if we listen very carefully to our community and we are actually addressing either the greatest opportunities that are facing bottlenecks or solving the problems or plugging the gaps that are actually impeding high quality innovation with commercial viability. So I think part of the dance that we do is actually figuring out what it is we need to be working on and where we need to expand our programming. And I can bore you with that in a second. Then it's actually working with folks from these different disciplines in order to manifest usable resources or create educational programming or create a certification program, which we're actually going to launch in 2024, sort of a good housekeeping, if you like, for digital health software products, doing that with the community so that it reflects their values and their needs, and then making sure that we go beyond what our academic colleagues can traditionally do, who are only funded to the point of completing the work and sending it off to publication, but digging in and doing the work in partnership with the community to make sure that the incentives exist and there is sufficient clarity to actually go out and implement on some of these things. So while I've described some of the scientific frameworks we've built, we also do some really practical work. And I'll give you an example. So, you know, we have our impact collaborative, really focused on virtual first care to drive towards and support a future vision we have of a truly hybrid healthcare environment.
Yeah.
Right. Part of this was not terribly scientific at all, but very important, was we recognized that it was taking far, far too long in order for virtual first care organizations to actually contract with payers. You know, it's like a bad joke. They turn up at the door of the payer and they're like, oh, you're a virtual first care provider. These people over here reimburse for digital therapeutics. And they're like, no, we're not a digital therapeutic. We are healthcare. We're just digitally enabled.
Actually, turns out that those people over there probably don't reimburse for digital therapeutics, but that's a separate issue.
You're exactly right. Go over there and then you'll have the door slammed in your face.
Yeah.
And then, or, oh, your software as a service. And it's like, no, we're digitally enabled healthcare. So we realized that as long as it was taking years for virtual first care providers to contract with payers, this was either going to be a modality of care that died on the vine, or was going to become vastly overfit for direct to consumer or for large employers. And we were going to absolutely miss the commercially and insured market and Medicare. So we actually worked to build what's publicly available off the shelf, contracting template and guide. And we've got data from our community that we've now reduced time to contracting for virtual first care companies with payers by 18 months.
Yeah.
If you think about what that means in terms of like fundraising cycles, game changer.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And you started, well, I think you tell me where you tell me where you started, because I was going to mention the virtual first. You have a community of companies who are in that now, obviously, but you also started with kind of a definition, trying to explain what the hell it is, which is great, because for too long, oddballs like me have been going around saying, here's what I think this thing is, and drawing charts and whatever, but and it's been a combination of ego-driven / random person who was about in the industry saying, here's what I think's going on, right? And and while that's good to get stuff off the ground, and me and Indy used to argue about definitions, and I think we had 7. We would change our definitions every year and come up with something new. But it's harder to get people, and Hallie Tech at Rock Health and the folks there did stuff. It's harder to get people to rally around it if it doesn't have kind of that sort of gold standard. Now, the National Academy of Medicine could have done this. I mean, not saying they would have got as practical. They could have got better for the definition, but that kind of stuff got so marred in wonkiness. It's really hard to produce that sort of learning healthcare report and there's so much stuff going in. If you want to find something that, we have a real opportunity to build this hybrid care system, which could improve primary care for a lot of people. We've got a bunch of companies that are kind of doing it, but they're not connecting in the right way. That's a great thing. You can make a definition and say, because we're all bought in, and we've got these people we've got these various constituents on board. Let's make it, let's make some templates to make stuff get from A to B to C much more quickly. And a fantastic job. I mean, so that was a great one. I recommend. Go ahead.
If I can pile on there for a second, I'm borrowing language from, you mentioned her earlier, Amy Abernathy. I used to talk a lot about this sort of common unifying language. She talks about a lingua franca, which I really like. And especially, you talked about, look, here's some of the other organizations that could have done it. And of course they could. It's not rocket science to come up with a definition, but there's something to be said for a definition that is clear enough that all of the constituents who need to understand it actually get what it is, and that it isn't something that comes out of the traditional environment, but is something that is a result of a balanced conversation. And I think that's what we could sort of uniquely bring. And then it's not just defining it, and it's defining things that matter and then driving them towards implementation. Absolutely. And
I'm laughing because Jester Master and I used to look at all these definitions, and we would kind of laugh and then come up with crazy definitions about this stuff. She has a thing about a new company doing virtual first care with the side of mental health and this, that, and the other, and into it, ta-da! But which is very funny. But I remember at the time the World Health Organization came out with a definition of digital health, which managed to include M-health, e-health, and it had several buzzwords, which are all kind of out of date now as well. And I was like, that one means nothing. Whereas yours is clear. And I love that the virtual first image, the language, get it. It's simple. You get what's going on, but it's also you got the hybrid connection piece, which is great. And then as you should do something with it, right? That's the next part. So you give templates for creation. So before we go, I want to dive into Cancer X, because that's obviously a big thing you're doing at the moment, some other stuff, but just give me another flavor. You got 40 people, you've done a ton of stuff and you're doing a ton of stuff. So some of the stuff you've done, around different projects with the Academy, with endpoints, give me a flavor of the smorgasbord of stuff that people can get involved with if they care about digital medicine, because there are so many more people, even with the crash of the stocks. There are so many more people who care about this now than did 5 years ago. I wish I'd been 5 years later with Health 2.0, but 10,000 people at Health compared to 2,500 people at Health 2.0 is not purely because they're 4 times more attractive than me and Indy were. It's also the market's headed in that direction for a reason, right? Okay, 100%. Vegas is a draw or whatever.
Here's what's interesting to me about the current market situation, which is, I'm going to use bad language, I hope you don't mind. It's shitty watching it, because it's people who we know have good ideas and have worked hard. And as the startup market sort of undergoes a bit of a correction, and it's a correction, there's no doubt there. there are companies that are going under, there are good ideas that are getting lost, and there are good people who are losing their jobs. That's always awful. And I think back to me coming into the worst economy that we've known in 2008 and trying to get a job. And you know where I got a job? In healthcare. Because in the United States of America, we are not going to stop spending less than 18% of GDP on healthcare, as much as we might talk about bending the cost curve. The reality is I love living in a country that spends this much on healthcare. I'm just really motivated to actually get better value from it.
Yeah,
so,
that's
the market...
let me try to say one thing, which was talking about that economy. There's been a ton of stuff about how well the economy is doing, right? We just released the numbers, 5% growth, low inflation, isn't it great? And anyone can get a job anywhere. And people like, since the pandemic, have terribly negative feelings about the economy. And I'm going, so funnily enough, the other person who might have given you a job in 2009 was me, because I was in year 3 of Health 2.0, and it was just me and Indu. And we thought, hang on, we're working like 27 hours a day. Perhaps we could hire somebody. We hired a couple of young people to start. And I do recall one of the people we hired, Hillary McCown, who was our first marketing person. She was right out of, she'd done one tiny job out of college and then had been laid off in 2008. She told me she stood outside a specialties cafe in San Francisco that was going to hire like 5 temporary workers in very late 2008, early 2009. And she said she was in a queue of 400 people that didn't move. It was brutal trying to get a job back then for a young person coming out of college, and there were a few bright spots, and things picked up, 2010, 11, but people forget how really awful that was. I know we went through something bad with the pandemic, but that was kind of corrected by government action very quickly.
100. I had just come off of like essentially an amateur sport, right? That I've been cobbling things together.
You didn't have a $15 million annual contract to row? I can't believe it.
I know, because so many people watch it.
It's
the shocker that the advertising sort of revenue isn't high.
I know. But you didn't play baseball. What are you going to say?
Make a really good point, which is we are definitely experiencing a correction, and there is definitely pain in the market. And even the big companies right now, we work with them too. Their 2023 budgets were vastly compressed. Discretionary funding was down for everyone, even the big Fortune 100s. And that's not really going to change in 2024, but these are the constraints within which we need to work. And I think that there's just a different attitude that we need to come to the table with. And so, the pressing need to effectively digitize healthcare is actually, there's a greater imperative now than there has ever been.
I'd argue 2 things, right? One is, yes, you will see in times of, sectoral crisis or post-bubble crisis. You saw this in 2002 to 3 and 4 in technology and elsewhere, that a lot of companies start getting built and start getting adoption, right? And I think that what you are seeing now amongst particularly hospital systems to some extent and a little bit to health plans is that, realization that they do need to start adopting these things. Like you said, figuring out how to pay for virtual first clinics, because there are areas in which what's been happening is not good enough and has to change naturally. And you look at mental health as a great example. I saw a chart this morning that said that between 2017 and now, something like the rate of therapy or of Harvard freshmen or Harvard students getting therapy has gone from like 12% to 40%. So you're seeing massive demands on the system. We've got to figure out how to help that in many different areas. Mental health is an obvious one, but many others. But I think that the part that the part you're dead right is that you've got to. This transformation takes a while. There's busts and boom and busts, in stock prices and in activity and all the rest of it. But it's not an accident that there are a lot more people going to health now in the bust era than there were doing stuff, in 2015 and Health 2.0. It's sad for my personal pocketbook, but it's not an accident, right?
Exactly.
So I that's dead true. So anyway, so I would cut you off, but so finish your thought, and then I want to talk about Cancer X before we run out of time.
And I think that's really important because, let's go back to the mental health example. 1 in 2 counties in the United States do not have a single mental health care provider.
Yeah.
And here's the other one, which is sort of the kicker that I always chase this with, which is 50% of Black Americans live in a county with no cardiologist. And so, how do we solve these problems? And they are problems, I was reading an article this morning about the state of some of the HCA hospitals in Appalachia, and just the clinician to patient ratios, tragedies in the emergency room because they're so understaffed. Ambulances sitting in a bay for an hour before they can actually pull through and get admitted. It's just, there isn't a fix unless we embrace digital. And that doesn't mean that it's a silver bullet. And it doesn't mean that clinicians and a vocational profession of individuals who are highly trained and want to care for people go away. But we need to figure out how to extend this. We need to figure out how to make it accessible to everyone. We need to figure out how, with the enormous amount of new evidence that increases, daily, which no human could wrap their head around, to make sure that they are making optimal clinical decisions, that we're actually using the tools that we now have to improve not only life for patients, but actually the lives of the clinicians that we all depend upon to care for us.
Absolutely. And I think, and as you said, scaling technology, and then, we haven't mentioned AI yet, but we should do a 45 minutes in, embracing AI rationally to scale technology and improve, because you're never going to go back to 1945 and whatever, and send the cardiologist coming home from the war to that rural county in Appalachia or wherever to solve the problem. It's not going to happen. We have to do it in a modern way. So, all right. So talking about things that need changing, cancer care clearly is one of them. And you now with ONC and Moffitt Cancer Center are running this CancerX project. What the hell is it? And there's so much that needs to be fixed in cancer care. What's the project? What's CancerX? Who's involved? And what are you trying to fix?
Yeah, and we are incredibly proud of this. So CancerX is a public-private partnership, and it's the 18th initiative under the White House Cancer Moonshot. So the goals of the Cancer Moonshot are to reduce the number of deaths from cancer by 50% over what was the next 25 years, when empty 3.5. And then also to make sure that, there's equity and improved quality of life for those individuals who are sort of in a battle with cancer. Those are the overarching goals of the Moonshot. We were established to really be the entity that thinks about harnessing the power of digital innovation in order to support the achievement of the goals of the Cancer Moonshot. So set up as a public-private partnership, you're exactly right. Our sort of co-hosts are our colleagues at Moffitt Cancer Center, also at ONC, OASH, which is the Office for the Assistant Secretary for Health, the White House. But on our steering committee, we have a number of other federal agencies, FDA and others, that we work very closely with. And what I'm incredibly proud of, Matthew, is that we've now got over 160 industry players at the table with us. So these are large healthcare systems, these are payers, these are sort of digital innovators, from sort of platforms to clinical decision support to digitally enabled care, investors, VCs. And the way that we have structured CancerX in order to harness the power of digital innovation to achieve the goals of the Cancer Moonshot is that we've got sort of a three-pronged set of activities. The first is pre-competitive evidence generation. So there's a reason that the digitization of oncology is lagging behind. The kinds of data that we need to experience, the very multidisciplinary care, the complexities of referrals, so on and so forth. There are real challenges around a lack of incentives to do that. And in some cases, we actually don't know what good science looks like or how we actually operationalize some of these things. So we can talk all day about more investment, but what are you investing in? You don't actually know what good looks like yet. So we are solving that problem through a rolling series of projects. And we're actually working now on how we use digital tools to reduce financial toxicity and improve equity. Absolutely outstanding work coming out of that, including in support of priorities of the First Lady, which relate to digital navigation. How do we actually support good decisions, regardless of where you are receiving your cancer care? And how do we get you access to the right treatment, regardless of where you are, so that it doesn't break the bank or that you don't suffer inequity because you aren't located by an academic medical center or an NCI center of excellence? So that's one part. The second part, we've just announced this, I'm really proud of this, is our accelerator. And of course, if you know one accelerator, you know one accelerator, they're all a bit different, but we're partnering with colleagues at Mass Challenge who are going to be implementing it. And really what we want to do is set up sort of a hothouse where we can really support those innovators once we determine what good looks like, that there is actually, a sufficient groundswell of innovators who are actually capable of delivering on it. So within the CancerX community, we have sort of exceptional sort of champions and folks will be implementing and adopting. We actually have a call for our first cohort out now for later stage startups to come and join us and to participate in the CancerX Accelerator. And then the third piece is really demonstration projects. So we can define what good looks like. We can prepare the industry with the skills and companies that exist to actually deliver on that. Unfortunately, healthcare is hard. And it's sometimes, I said this earlier, we need to show, not tell, that these things actually work in practice. So we do have a number of demonstration projects that we're spinning up. And the first one, we will be announcing some results actually at the ONC annual meeting on December 14th. We've been working on a data sprint with our colleagues at CMMI. They are launching a pilot, an enhancing oncology model. What's really cool about this one is it's the first CMMI pilot that's actually using a FHIR API and not XLS to capture all of the data. So we are thinking about how do we actually create data elements that we aren't just powering an absolutely exceptional sort of pilot for different payment models, but that we are actually creating future real world data sets that the research community can usefully mine, because we are collecting these data organically through the EHR. So more on that to come.
That's that learning healthcare system we were talking about. That all those you can find these. You could. I'm kidding, but I'm not entirely kidding. At the end of it, right?
I'm not kidding either. That's exactly what it is.
The National Academy of Medicine, right? They put all that was like 4 days worth of brilliant people, crammed all together, like 58 PowerPoints, like in one document, in one 700-page PDF. And they wrote and they sent it to me, and I said, "This is great, but it's going to be a bit tricky to digest this. Could somebody write a summary or an opinion piece, or how are you going to socialize it?" And like getting that into the world, the way you've done it is tough. But also, what you mentioned is like, can you start getting data sets that people can learn out of, 100%. Right? And that's clearly been a massive struggle. And I presume, putting words in your mouth, but you're talking about seeding an accelerator, getting a bunch of companies to work in that environment, getting them access to that kind of data, and seeing what happens. Because we know. I was at this mental health conference, so that Salome TBB runs, which was top of my head. But we know we do stuff in cancer that we shouldn't be doing. We're not clear who, why, or how we're doing it to, and we're also doing a very bad job, as you said, supporting people equity-wise, access-wise, financially, but also during their journey. And there are obviously now navigation companies trying to do stuff, and people are trying, but it's not a great experience. And by the way, you'll get the mental health is worse, because I heard at this conference 60% of the people we're treating don't have an adequate diagnosis. So we don't. So it's like you're treating them for chemotherapy, but you don't know what tumor they've got. So we have a lot of areas that you can go work in. Can you tell me, just towards the end, give me a sense organizationally how you get funded, right? So I assume if you're one of these supporting companies in the one of your, I think you said 60 odd organizations, you're paying a membership fee to. Are you paying that for CancerX? Are you paying it? Does Dime get a separate cut? Do you get other grants? How you have to pay 50 people, so it's not free. Well, unless they're all very nice volunteers working out of the goodness of their heart, which probably not.
They are all very nice, and they all work out of the goodness of their heart. They
still need to get paid, right?
Get paid, yes, exactly. So there's good news there. Yeah. So it's really interesting. And in the early days of Dime, thought a lot about what the right sort of financial model was. And what we didn't want to do was create an organizational membership, because that feels like a really good way to disappoint a lot of people, but to also reduce our ability to be agile in what it is that we're tackling. So we take a much more a la carte approach, and this means that our partnerships team is not only exceptional, but works their ass off, because they bring people to the table for every different initiative. So that relationship building, that communication is such an important part of what we do. But we are funded in terms of our research and initiatives on a project by project basis. And so what that means is we actually get a really good signal from the market about, is this actually an important problem to solve for based on market appetite? We're able to set the table with the leading experts on that topic, who not only are in a position to help us develop sort of a definition of what good looks like, but they can also, back to what makes us successful, they can also take those resources or those contracts or whatever it looks like on the road and actually immediately implement them. So they are the right vectors for change. So, you know, we're a charity, so anyone can see this from a 990. The majority of our funding to date has come through those sorts of industry pre-competitive collaborations. We also do have several contracts with the federal government. So we have a partnership with VA that I'm very proud of, that we support their digital strategy. That's been going on for about 3 years. BARDA is actually one of the co-funders of our upcoming certification program for digital health software products. And then we hadn't done it until this year, but as we thought about growing and as we thought about making sure that we were resilient in a different sort of market, we now have several scientific grants. And then we have our Digital Medicine Academy, which is just a fantastic set of resources where we have enterprise licenses and direct to learner courses. So people can really come either upskill their teams or upskill themselves as a differentiator in the market. And so that's a revenue generating model for us as well.
That's great. I mean, I remember go back to decades ago. I worked at the Institute for the Future, which was not quite as large as Dime is now, but it was like a 30-person organization, and there was a lot of balancing of, you know, you had a few sort of government grants, NSF type grants, you had a few big foundation grants, which were usually project based. I remember working on the 10-year future of healthcare for Robert Wood Johnson. Then you had these kind of rolling membership programs around a particular topic, somewhat similar to what you're doing, and you know, it's a really, the business of running one of these organizations is not easy. As you said, your partnership people have got to be really good. The people the people who are, as you mentioned earlier, right? If times get tough, everyone starts cutting stuff. This sometimes looks a little discretionary. We're supporting this thing that is, you know, a little amorphous and doesn't produce revenue day one. That kind of stuff, you know, can get cut. So it is tricky to manage it, which does mean you have to come and sort of be hitting at a problem that is going to have results, and you know, you've got to perform as a non-profit. It's a tricky business, right?
Yeah, and I mean it is, and I think that, I mean, I can't tell you how honored we are, for example, to have been, you know, given the responsibility to co-host CancerX alongside our colleagues at Moffitt Cancer Center for an organization that at the time wasn't even 4 years old. That's an enormous responsibility. And even after 3.5 years, we had enough proof points to prove that we could handle that kind of responsibility. We'd been hosting a collaborative community with FDA for 2 years at that point. We had enough. We'd been working with VA. And so, you know, I think that one of the things that you have actually articulated better than I do, so I will be stealing this, is this revenue model keeps us honest about the fact that we are actually solving the problems that industry needs us to solve for in order to use digital tools to improve the way that we care for people. It also comes back to the quality of the work that our Dime team does, and it truly is an exceptional group of experts, not only themselves, but in the way that they harness the expertise and the experience and the enthusiasm of the folks who pull up a chair at the table as leaders to say, we're actually going to tackle this problem in the pre-competitive space. We take that really seriously, our obligation to them, making good use of their time, delivering them value for trusting us. And we know as a team, we are only as good as your last experience with us. Like, if we drop into that nice to have category instead of need to have, we run into trouble. So that keeps us, I think, really at the forefront of these things, solving the right problems with the right people at the table and delivering resources every single time that actually change the field.
Fantastic. And I like it. It's a really tough gig, and you know, you are the the kingpin at the top, spinning lots of plates on sticks, you know, and running around making sure they don't fall off. I bet, you know, it's a super tough job because in some ways, because of the diversity of what you're doing. Yes, it's within digital medicine, digital health, but I mean, there are lots of different pieces, and you know, stuff can get lost, and you know, you got to take the risk of making sure that you don't establish a little bureaucracy somewhere in your organization that kind of gets lost, and then one day you find that there is no call for it. So that there's a lot of work doing. So salute you for that. All right, last thing, we're at the end of the hour. you mentioned some of the stuff that's coming next, but give me a minute on what's coming soon next, with the stuff that's coming this month at ONC meeting and some of those, and then give me like what's happening in where do you want to be? Where do you want this to go in a couple of years?
So the soon next pieces we have covered. So we've got the accelerator for CancerX is now up and running, and we are welcoming applicants to that through the end of the month. We are also announcing some of the early findings of our data sprint and the upcoming pilots through CancerX at the ONC meeting. As we look ahead to next year, we want to continue to expand our educational offerings and really making sure that we are addressing the skills gap. As you said, it's not as it was in the fall of 2008, but a lot of exceptional people in our field are struggling to differentiate themselves as employees in this market, really want to bring value to their organizations. How are we addressing the upskilling of the field to make sure that we actually have the workforce capable of delivering on the promise of the digitization of health? That's a big deal. We've got some really exciting sort of projects where we're starting to do more and more what I would describe as implementation or demonstration projects. We're developing a risk prediction engine for opioid use disorder, which I think is really, really important. We're starting to think about, can we do something similar for early detection of cytokine release syndrome, also related to sort of oncology. And then next summer, which we're really excited about, we will be launching our certification program, really creating an opportunity for digital health product developers to differentiate themselves in the market when they do the right thing and when they build trustworthy products, and making it easier for both investors and the sort of adopters of these technologies to sort the trash and to really find out what is worthy of further consideration and what perhaps isn't where it needs to be and is going to erode confidence in the market.
Yeah, I think there's been a lot of people trying to figure that part out for a long time, and that's probably that just because you do that program won't solve it all, but it's going to be a long way towards helping. So that's a great thing to do. All right, brilliant. Well, so much stuff going on. You're such a busy man. Thank you so much for spending an hour with me. I've been talking with Jen Goldsack. She is the CEO of the Digital Medicine Society, or DIME, as it's called. And I noticed that your Twitter handle isn't very active. Are you boycotting Musk like the rest of us should do? Haven't quite got around to. Maybe, I don't know. But you can find them on the web.
Put it this way. We're placing our chips where we think they can do the most good, and that it currently isn't on X.
All right, you can find them. You can find them online by searching Digital Medicine Society. I'll put a link to that in the show notes. And Jen, thank you so much for your time. And I'll be back, I hope, next week, although I'm also on the way to Japan, with another gang, which will actually have a gang rather than just have a gang of two. Oh, a gang of two's enough for a gang, right?
Two's enough for a gang, of course. And Matthew, thank you for all of your support. It really takes exceptional leaders across the field to get this done, and to keep me sort of energized and driving forward.
I'm just good for fetching a gin and tonic when I see you need one.
And you do it very well.
That's all the skill I bring. All right. Thanks, Jane, so much. Thanks for your time.
Of course.